specifically for reminding me about what a wonderful friend I had in Izzy Kaplan. And how happy I am to see Susie here and to hear that she's making Aliyah. Yay! I remember when I was growing up, one of my favorite movies was a movie, Barry Levinson film that came out in 1980 called Diner. And there was a line in there where one guy was talking to another guy and he said, "Oh, you're always a dreamer." And the guy said, "Well, you know, if you don't have dreams, you got nightmares." And I think it's true. I think one of the things that we've found is that we've allowed ourselves in Israel, and also, I would say, throughout the Jewish world, to become the prisoners of our fears, to be so apprehensive about what the outcome will be if we, or the consequences would be if we assert ourselves, that we stopped. We can see the dangers 10 miles down the road if we assert our rights, but we don't see how we are endangering ourselves by not doing so. And I'll give you a couple of examples. You know, I just have been amazed over the past couple of months. Sometimes I think about things, and sometimes I make a determined effort not to think about things because I have to think about other things. But recently it's become impossible not to think about the anti-Semitic incitement on U.S. and Canadian and college campuses throughout North America, and of course as well in Europe. And no matter how hard I try to not deal with it, I can't escape it, because the incitement and the violence and the hatred of Israel on college campuses and those who support Israel on college campuses, has become so overwhelming and so ubiquitous that you can't ignore it any longer. You know, and every single week you hear another horror story that would have just been unimaginable 20 years ago. I graduated from Columbia University in 1991. When I was at Columbia, and still today, but when I was there, during the Palestinian uprising in the late 80s, Columbia with Edward Said was the epicenter of anti-Israel activism in the university world. But for all of the things that I had to deal with as a pro-Israel activist on campus as an undergraduate, they were nothing in compared to what students today have to deal with on every campus, practically, in the United States and in Canada. And when I was looking, I don't know if you guys noticed, but there was a BDS resolution that was voted down by one vote and by the student government of University of California at Los Angeles, done several weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. And one of the things that was captured on YouTube was this meltdown that one of the members of the student government had when the resolution, the anti-Semitic resolution to wage economic warfare against the Jewish state and to demonize and delegitimize all supporters of Israel, Jewish and non-Jewish, on university campuses. You had this student, this female student. She wasn't wearing a hijab either, and she looked like a normal, maybe non-Jewish, maybe Jewish, I don't know, but student at University of California at Los Angeles, and she simply went berserk. Crying, weeping, muttering in an incomprehensible way that the sky was falling, that the world was destroyed, because this anti-Semitic resolution wasn't passed. And I think while I was watching that, the coin fell, I got something. And what I realized was that this young woman is absolutely convinced that Israel is Nazi Germany, that Israelis are Nazis, and that to give any legitimacy to the Jewish state or its supporters, Jewish and non-Jewish, is to collaborate with the Nazis. That she was genuine. I mean, and this is her true, heartfelt conviction. And yes, it's true, she's a young woman and, you know, is behaving like a Freudian hysteria, but I don't think she was necessarily neurotic. She simply thought that a moral atrocity had happened because she has become convinced that Israel is the most evil country in the world. And she thinks she's a moral person. And her job as a good person is to criminalize anybody who supports Jews and Jewish power and Jewish sovereignty. And we see this in university after university with young people speaking in a horrible fashion to supporters of Israel and opponents to BDS, with absolute conviction that theirs is the side of justice, that they are right, and that everybody who supports Israel, even tangentially, is evil. And I could give you example after example, from Vassar College in Poughkeepsie, New York, to the National University in Ireland, to anywhere. And you know it here at the University of Toronto. So, what do we learn from this? That these people know nothing at all about Judaism, about Israel, about Nazi Germany, about anti-Semitism. They know nothing. Nothing at all. Because the only way that people can have these kinds of violent responses to the defeat of anti-Semitic resolutions, unless they're, you know, Nazis themselves, which some of them may be, is if they're complete and utter ignoramuses, who have been taught lies, who have been taught lies and have never heard the truth before in their entire life. Now, what's ironic about this state of affairs is that it's happening today, and it's been happening since 2002, to a very large and increasingly violent degree. And it didn't happen, again, back in the day when old lady Carolyn was at Columbia University and the evil Shamir was Prime Minister of Israel. And he was sticking his finger in Jim Baker's eye, right? And saying, peace for peace. Why is it happening now when for the past 20 years the Israeli government has embraced appeasement of the PLO as a centerpiece of its national policy, and it didn't happen in the 1980s when Israel was doing the exact opposite? And the answer is because Israel has been embracing appeasement of the PLO since 1993. That is why it's happened. By what do I mean by that? The two-state paradigm that Israel has been advancing since 1993, since Israel recognized the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinian people, is based upon foundations that are utterly anti-Semitic. The two-state solution claims that the reason for the absence of peace in the Middle East is the absence of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River. That is a two-state solution in a nutshell. Former President Bill said in 2010 that once a Palestinian state is established, 50% of terrorism, not just in the region, but around the world, will disappear. That there is no single act that can do more to end terrorism than the establishment of a Palestinian state. And of course, Bill Clinton is representing the views of a bipartisan sense of reality among American leaders. His view is shared by his wife, is shared by Barack Obama, by John Kerry, by George Bush, by Condoleezza Rice, by Colin Powell, by Dick Armitage, by George H.W. Bush, by Jim Baker, by Brent Scowcroft, and I could go on and on and on. This is the prevailing view among everybody. Now, if this is the view, what does it say? That whoever is responsible for the absence of a Palestinian state is responsible for all of the pathologies of the Middle East. And who is the party that is responsible for the absence of a Palestinian state? Israel. The Jews. The Jews are to blame for everything that is happening, that all of the horrible things emanating from and transpiring within the Islamic world. And the worst of the worst, the greatest enemy of all that is good and right in the world is the Israeli right. It's not Al-Qaeda. It's not Iran. It's Bibi Netanyahu and all of the members of his coalition, because they're the ones who will not give enough to the Palestinians, to the PLO, to satisfy it. And if they would just stop respecting Jewish property rights in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, if they just threw all of the Jews out of their communities in those areas, then 50% of the impetus for terrorism, not just in the world, but throughout the world, would disappear overnight. No more taking off your shoes at the airport. Nothing. No more looking around to see who's coming into a cafe anywhere. Nothing. It's all gone, or at least 50%. No single act would do more to end the global scourge of terrorism than the establishment of a Palestinian state, and the sole party at fault for the absence of that state are the Jews, is the Jewish state. Now, did we think this through when we embraced this paradigm? No, we didn't. We didn't. We thought that if we accepted that justice could be shared, that there was justice on both sides, that we would bring peace. That if we yielded our rights and conferred legitimacy on our worst enemies, that we would be strengthened. But what happens? When you stop asserting your rights, you lose them. And when one side says it wants peace and the other side says it wants justice, then the side that wants peace is the loser and the side that wants justice is just. And so that girl in UCLA has heard Jews talking about the need for defensible borders and the desire for peace, and she's heard Palestinians say, we have been robbed of our birthright. Justice lays with us and with us alone. The Jews stole our land. They're thieves. They're Judaizing Jerusalem and Judea, for crying out loud. That's what they're hearing. We're Judaizing, and that's a pejorative. Because Jews have no rights. Because we're not a people. Because we have no history. Because we have no connection to the land of Israel. Because our very assertion of those rights is an act of aggression. And what are we saying? We want peace. We want peace. Or we just need defensible borders. Well, again, if this land doesn't belong to you, Israel, we don't care that you can't defend yourself without them. They're not yours. It's your problem. Deal with it. I have to take my shoes off at the airport because you say that you need Jerusalem, which doesn't belong to you. And that is why we have a situation in large part on campuses today that was as horrible as I thought it was for little Carolyn Glick in 1988 on Columbia campus dealing with Edward Said. These people are being denied their right to be Jewish. Today on campuses, they are being coerced by their school administrators into being silent in the face of anti-Israel aggression. In campus after campus. Last week alone at Vassar, University of Michigan, at San Francisco State University, just to name a few off the top of my head, It's happening. If we are not asserting our rights, those rights are rejected, right? If we are not making the claim and defending ourselves and selling our own story, then nobody's going to buy it. You know, the fact that Israel is the only liberal democracy in the Middle East, the only country that doesn't persecute but empowers homosexuals, the only country where women have equal rights, and in all ways, the only country that has freedom of religion and association for all, is completely beside the point. The beautiful Israel, the high-tech nation, the startup nation that everybody's talking about, it doesn't matter one whit if we don't have justice on our side. If we are not making the case for Israel, not for all the aspects of Israel, but for our rights, because our rights are being rejected, our rights are being denied, our rights are being negated by people who want to obliterate us. And again, the two-state solution that we embraced because we thought that that was going to show the world how good-hearted we are, has made it impossible for us to explain who we are. Because when you take on the narrative, accept the narrative of your enemy, whose sole organizing principle is a desire to see you destroyed, you cannot defend yourself. You cannot defend yourself. So, where does that lead me? It leads me to the conclusion that we have to stop supporting the two-state solution. And here's it's nice to be in a pro-Israel country. And here too, you know, we have to understand that because we have so subjectively embraced a policy thinking that it was going to increase our diplomatic cachet and has destroyed it, we have convinced ourselves that abandoning it will destroy us, right? We've told ourselves that we're going to be overcome by demography within 5 minutes of asserting our rights to Judea and Samaria. The Palestinians, they're just going to be multiplying like it's going out of style, and within, you know, by 2015, January 1st, there's going to be an Arab majority west of the Jordan River, and Israel's going to have to decide between remaining a Jewish state or remaining a democracy. But we can't have both, we're told. But just like the claim that Jews have no right to the land of Israel and that the indigenous people are Palestinian Arabs who have no unique national history either in the land of Israel or anywhere else. And in fact, their founder, Haj Amin al-Husseini, didn't even see them as a distinct nation, but rather wanted to be part of a greater Syria. We have lost our ability to recognize reality. And it's staring us in the face. I remember my father and mother came to Israel a couple of years ago when I was pregnant with my younger child, and we went to the zoo with a girlfriend of mine and my older child and her children, and my dad's looking around, and he says, "I don't get it." And I said, "What?" He said, "Look at this. Look at how many kids are here. Every family has like 4 or 5 children." I said, "I don't understand how anybody could see this scene and say that Israel has a demographic problem. This is nowhere else in the world do you see something like this." And I said, "You're right, Dad. You're absolutely right. But people aren't looking with their eyes. They're looking with their fears." Now, in 1997, the PLO put out a census of the Palestinian population in Judea and Samaria and Gaza, and in Jerusalem, of course. And they claimed that they had the highest growth rate in the world, compound growth rate, immigration and births, and that they were going to outnumber Jews west of the Jordan River by 2010. They've since revised it. Now I think they're up to 2020. Every year they change the year. Because what happened in the intervening years, in 1997, Palestinian women in Judea and Samaria had on average 4.5 children. Today they have 2.9. In 1995, Israeli women had on average 2.1 children. Now they have 3.04. We're having more kids than they are. They claimed that they had a base population of 2.8 million people on the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and they had, at the time, 1.3 million. They inflated the number of Palestinians by 50%. Now, I apologize for not knowing the number of people in Canada, but in the United States, the population is 320,000. I'm sorry, million. You know what I meant. And first I was too far away, now I'm too close. Make a decision. Anyway, imagine if the U.S. Census Bureau came out with a population count that said that the U.S. population had suddenly increased to 480 million from 320 million overnight. That would be extraordinary, wouldn't it? Nobody would believe them, because it would be a lie, but the Palestinians did it, and everybody accepted the numbers as a holy writ. But they weren't a holy writ, they were a lie, and then they claimed that their growth rates were going to be higher and rising every year, and they were having massive immigration, and it was going to grow every year, when they had net migration, negative immigration every single year, except for 1994, when all the troops came in with Arafat. So this was a complete fabrication. And in the meantime, Jews have proven that we actually know how to go forth and multiply. But we're told, no, you can't go forward, you can't assert your rights, because if you do, you're going to be overtaken by Palestinian demography. If Israel were to apply its laws to Judea and Samaria tomorrow, say, this is ours, we're done with this two-state thing, we're taking matters into our own hands, and we are going to apply our laws and through them our sovereignty to Judea and Samaria, to just as we did in the Golan Heights in 1981 and we did in Jerusalem in 1967. Jews would still maintain a 2/3 majority inside of Greater Israel. And I don't believe in demographic projections over the long term, because everything is subject to change for a whole host of reasons. But if the current trends, not increase of Aliyah or anything, were to continue, both among the Israeli Jews and among the Arabs, Jews would restore their 79% majority in Greater Israel with Judea and Samaria by 2030, so in 15 years. Now, is this going to happen? It could. I mean, look what's happening in Europe. France today is the highest rate of Aliyah. They've surpassed Eastern Europe, and now with what's happening in Ukraine, you got to figure that that's going to go skyrocketing in the next year as well. And we are looking at high and rising Aliyah rates, and there's no reason with a little bit of government encouragement that they couldn't skyrocket even further. Aliyah has always been the main guarantor of the Jewish majority in the land of Israel. And there's no reason for us to assume that it will stop. And that was one of the other weird things about all these demographic doomsday scaremongers, is that they completely discounted Aliyah. We're doomed, they said. But instead of figuring out ways to solve the problem that they claim we're facing, they did nothing. They discouraged Aliyah. So what does that tell you about their motivations? They're not pure as driven snow. They were trying to force a policy on an unwilling public. My proposition is that Israel should just move forward, boldly and without fear. And we should apply our law to Judea and Samaria, just as we did in Jerusalem successfully in 67, and just as we did in the Golan Heights successfully in 1990. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. This land is ours. It's ours by historic right. It's ours by international legal right. And it's ours by justice. And we have to assert those rights. And we have to make the argument for those rights if we want to be respected. And if we want our children on college campuses today to not be attacked. And if we want to nip this BDS movement in the bud and tell all of these anti-Semites where they can go where the sun don't shine. The only way that we can do it is by telling them where to get off, right? And we can't tell them that if what we're saying is we just need secure and defensible. And we accept the justice of the other side when the other side exists in order to deny the justice of our side. All right? And one more thing about demographics. No, it's one of those things, right? When you're prisoner to your fears, you actually don't even think about the consequences of what you're doing. So everybody says that the way to ensure a Jewish majority for the long haul in the land of Israel is to establish a Palestinian terrorist state in Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem. Right? That's what everybody says. Because we know it's going to be a terrorist state because anybody who has any chance of leading that state is a terrorist. Abbas is a terrorist, Hamas is a terrorist, all of Abbas's deputies are terrorists, all of his potential heirs are terrorists. Everybody in a position to lead such a state is a terrorist. So that's the kind of state it would be. Now, assuming for a second that such a state wouldn't be a terrorist state and that Abbas would suddenly, somehow or another, become a moderate, somehow suddenly become somebody who wants to peacefully coexist with Israel, well, he's going to be bringing in a lot of new people. Right? And they're going to be coming from UN-run refugee camps that are controlled by Hamas, Al-Qaeda, Ahmed Jibril, Hezbollah, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, in sunny spots like Damascus, like Beirut, right? Vacation spots. And all of these people are going to be flooding into the Palestinian state. On the other side of the border is going to be an Israel with indefensible borders, with Jerusalem, an open and partitioned city that they can just walk in, enter into the Damascus gate and go out Jaffa gate and just walk straight to Malcha, to Rehavia, to Talbia. No problem. Now all of these people coming in, are they going to just want to, live at peace? They have been marinated in genocidal Jew hatred for 66 years. What are the chances that they're just going to be looking for work in Jenin? What are the chances that they're just going to be wanting to seek a doctorate in basket weaving from Berzate University? Zero. You want to talk about the demographic threat that Israel faces, the existential demographic threat that Israel faces as opposed to the demographic challenge that Israel would face if we applied our laws to Judea and Samaria? That is the demographic challenge. That is the existential demographic threat to Israel's survival as a Jewish state. I want to add another layer to this. We're in Canada. Like I said, it's nice to be in a pro-Israel country with a pro-Israel government. Having just come from Chicago, Stephen Harper really is a true friend of Israel. And God bless the Canadian people for electing him to be the Prime Minister of this great country. But here's Stephen Harper, who really is a true friend of Israel, supporting the establishment of a Palestinian terrorist state that would pose an existential threat to Israel. Because he doesn't know that there's an alternative. He doesn't recognize the basic anti-Semitism and unjustness of the policy. And more to the point, if you don't recognize that, you can't actually coherently determine a Middle East policy in general that makes any sense. Now, think about the United States for a second. Here you have everybody from Bill Clinton to John Kerry to Brent Scowcroft to the dog catcher in Washington, all saying, right, that the principal problem The principal cause, the root cause of all of the pathologies in the Middle East is the absence of a Palestinian state. And the party responsible for that is Israel. What are they saying? They're saying that the United States' biggest enemy in the Middle East is the United States' only dependable ally in the Middle East. They're saying that Israel is the problem, not that Israel is the solution. So when you say that, what do you understand about the region? Nothing. Nothing. You can't understand a thing about the region if that's what you think the principal problem, the root cause of all of the difficulties posed by the region is. You simply can't understand anything at all. The really alluring thing about a blame the Jews Middle East policy is actually, it gives you license not to think about anything else. Because if you truly believe this insane notion that all of the problems in the region will go away the minute that a Palestinian state is established west of the Jordan River, in addition to the already existing Palestinian state west of the Jordan River in Gaza, then nothing else matters. Nothing else really matters. You have the panacea right there in your hand, and the recipe for success in everything that you do in the Middle East lies in coercing Israel into making concessions to the Arab world. And it revolves around developing a dependency on your military platforms, on your economic assistance, on your trade, so that you will then be able to coerce Israel into making concessions to the Arabs. Now, just a word for 1 second about that. The whole concept of a two-state solution, it's funny, because you would think for a second, well, Israel has tried. You know, we coughed up Jerusalem not once, but twice, right? In 2000 at Camp David, and then again in 2008 when Ehud Olmert offered Jerusalem to the PLO, to Mahmoud Abbas, and was rejected. So you got to wonder for a second, why is it? And of course, policymakers don't wonder this. If this has been the centerpiece not only of U.S. foreign policy or Middle East policy for the past 20 years, but European Middle East policy for the past 40 years, Canadian foreign policy as well, why hasn't it worked? And this is something people also don't understand. It hasn't worked in the past 20 or 40 years for the same reason that it hasn't worked for the past 90 years, which is that the two-state solution involves even a tiny Israel. Right? I mean, in the Peel Commission, partition resolution, Israel was supposed to basically be Tel Aviv. A little bit of Hadera. You know, I mean, it was a joke, and they rejected it. And they rejected it because they don't want any Israel. Because they reject the two-state paradigm because the two-state paradigm isn't anti-Semitic enough. Because it gives Jews a statelet. And they don't want to give Jews a statelet. So what's funny is that this anti-Semitic paradigm that has been the centerpiece of Western Middle East policy for the past 20 and 40 years can't succeed because it's not anti-Semitic enough. So they don't get that because they see Israel as the problem. And if you see Israel as a problem, again, you don't have to understand anything about the Middle East. So, for instance, in 2003, I was an embedded journalist with the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division when they invaded Iraq. And, you know, we were sitting in Kuwait waiting for the order to go in. And I was telling him, well, I was asking, so how are you protecting your convoys from terrorism? What do you mean, huh? I mean, how have you been organizing your supply lines to protect yourself from suicide bombing? What are your plans for when we stop? What is your plan for communicating with the local population so that you can weed out? Huh? They had no plan because they were marching blindly into Iraq. Now, why were they marching blindly into Iraq? Why were they taken by surprise when the first car bombing started and was attacked and killed 4 members of the battalion I was embedded with just a weekend. The first act of terrorism against U.S. forces after the invasion of Iraq. Oh, and by the way, the Palestinians named a square in Ramallah after the Iraqi soldier who committed the bombing. Why did they not understand this? They didn't understand it because they didn't understand that Israel was an ally. The only truly relevant military precedent going into Iraq was the Israeli experience in Lebanon from 1982 to 2000. That was the only truly relevant precedent that they should have learned as a case study in preparing for the invasion and subsequent control of Iraq after the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's regime. And they didn't look at it. Now, why was it relevant? It was relevant for 2 reasons. First, because demographically, Iraq and Syria and Lebanon are extremely similar. And if you want to understand the relationships between Shiites and Sunnis, Christians, and then in Iraq you also have Kurds, you have to understand Lebanon. Secondly, because Lebanon very quickly devolved into a proxy war against Israel that was being waged by 2 countries, Iran and Syria. And they operated Hezbollah as their proxy army. First it was Amal, then it was Hezbollah, with the assistance and guidance of the PLO against Israel in a way that was one-to-one what they did 20 years later in Iraq against the Americans. But what happened in the lead-up to the Iraq invasion? Well, as I say in my book, amazingly, not only was Israel not studied, but Dick Armitage, the Deputy Secretary of State, said to Doug Feith, the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, the #3 guy at the Pentagon, that he didn't even think that the U.S. could invade Iraq until there was progress in the peace process. Because for him, and for the Bush administration in general, Israel wasn't an ally. Israel was a burden. Israel's military experience had no relevance to U.S. forces, to the U.S. military, to the U.S. government. Why? Because the analogy that the Americans mindlessly had in their heads when they were invading Iraq was 1944 in Paris. They thought they were invading Paris. And people died as a result of that. You know, you can think whatever you want of the war in Iraq. I happen to have thought that it was a just war and it was justified, and the troops who carried it out were extraordinary men. But their government did them no service. To the contrary, by sending them in half-cocked into a country that nobody bothered to study. And again, why did they do that? Because they were sure that whatever happened in Iraq didn't matter, because what was really going to end terrorism and end anti-American sentiment in the Middle East was the establishment of a Palestinian state. The 2-state solution has been so debilitating that you can't even go to war and win, because the whole way you have of looking at the Middle East is that the only actor in the Middle East is Israel. Everybody else are just objects. Their aspirations, their ideologies, their mythologies, their social mores are completely irrelevant. The only actor whose actions are important to you are Israel's. You can't understand that it's your ally. Israel's our friend. Remember, Condoleezza Rice kept calling us the U.S.'s friend. The Western world needs a strong Israel. Needs a strong Israel. And what they've been doing is enabling and feeding the beast, their worst enemies, by weakening Israel. Nobody is propelled to become an ally of the United States of America as a result of U.S. pressure on Israel. To the contrary, America won its most important Arab ally because it stood by Israel in the Yom Kippur War, Egypt. But again, if you don't understand the Middle East, you can develop all kinds of mythologies about how to make everybody happy and love you, like, for instance, overthrowing your most steadfast and loyal and important ally in the Arab world, Hosni Mubarak, and ushering in the leadership of the Muslim Brotherhood, a jihadist movement dedicated to the destruction of human freedom. Right? You can do that. Because who cares, right? John Kerry knows what's really important. That's why he has spent the last 12 months completely obsessed with how many homes Israel is building for Jews or allowing Jews to build on land that they have possession of beyond the 1949 armistice lines. That is why, in the midst of everything that's happening in the Muslim world, John Kerry has visited Israel 13 times in the past 12 months. Because he knows what's important. The U.S. has lost ally after ally after ally in the Arab world. But he knows what's going to solve everything. This, obviously, as I said at the outset, has been a disaster for Israel and for the Jewish people as a whole. It has empowered the worst of our enemies to speak against us with such blind hatred and get away with it. And it has made it impossible for us as Jews in Israel and throughout the world to truly stand up to these people and to give them a fight. But for the West, it has been equally debilitating. The Middle East is an extremely dangerous region. It is fraught with pathologies, from jihad to misogyny, from economic failure to illiteracy, to fanaticism. But you can't understand any of it if your guiding principle in dealing with it is to stick it to the country that you need the most, is to stick it to your only loyal and dependable ally. You can't make a coherent policy. You can't protect yourself from aggression. You can't protect your interests. You can't expand your circle of allies. You can only deplete it. Because again, if your entire is based upon a delusion that happens to also be a moral atrocity, then you're not going to get anywhere good. Even if you are a true friend of Israel and a truly good person. You just can't. Because your guiding principles are all wrong. If Israel were to apply its laws to Judea and Samaria, how would the Palestinians respond? One of the things that we have to realize is that one of the worst actions ever taken against the Palestinians in Judea and Samaria was Israel's decision to embrace a terrorist organization and bring it in as a sole legitimate representative of people who had been living in Israel's midst since 1967. Because what we did to the Palestinians is say, we no longer see you as individuals. Every single one of you is Yasser Arafat. He's your sole legitimate representative. He's the only one who speaks for you. We don't care what you think anymore. We canceled them all out. Just like the Americans, we turned them all into objects, not into agents. And so what's extraordinary is that when you look at the polling data of how they feel about Israel, you can't believe the results. Because we figure all of them are Arafat. Minimum. If they're not Arafat, then they're Sheikh Yassin. Right? Osama bin Laden. Not true. You know, one of the things that I was startled to discover when I was researching my book, is that year in, year out, surveys of the Palestinians show that the democracy that they admire the most is Israel. Between 2/3 and 3/4 of Palestinians, year in, year out, say that Israel is the democracy that they admire the most in the world. And what's notable about that statistic is that you know that it is based on, it is not theoretical, it is practical, right? Because you assume that if you ask somebody, what's the greatest democracy in the world, everybody responds viscerally with the United States of America. Maybe not in Canada, but, I mean, really, this is just sort of in the third world, you know, what is the ideal? What is that democracy that everybody thinks about? It's America. And yet, none of, you know, 2/3 to 3/4 of them are saying Israel, which you're supposed to hate, right? But they don't hate Israel because they know Israel. because they know how we treat them as opposed to how the PLO treats them and how the Hamas treats them. They know us, and extraordinarily, familiarity in the case of 2/3 to 3/4 of the Palestinians does not breed contempt. It breeds admiration. Last year they did a survey, or 2 years ago they did a survey of Israeli Jews and Palestinians, how they feel about an Israeli unilateral withdrawal from Judea and Samaria. 46% of Israelis opposed it, 44% approved it, and the rest didn't have a position. 59% of Palestinians opposed a unilateral withdrawal by Israel from Judea and Samaria. 46% of Israelis, 59% of Palestinians. These numbers are extraordinary, people. They're extraordinary. And what they tell us is that if we know how to empower Palestinians to live good lives, they will, by and large, want to. We see this in Jerusalem, and I'll just give you one last statistics because I also want to get to Q&A. You know, it was an extraordinary survey that was undertaken by the former head of USAID for the Middle East and North Africa. Came to Israel after he retired from U.S. government service, and he conducted a very interesting survey of Jerusalem Arabs and asked them about what was more important to them: economics, politics, how they rated various identities that they have as individuals, their Israeli identity card, their Palestinian identity, their Islamic identity, and then where would you prefer to live, in Israel or in a Palestinian state. And he found that 30% of the Arabs of East Jerusalem preferred to live under Palestinian sovereignty than under Israeli sovereignty. 35% preferred to live under Israeli sovereignty than under Palestinian sovereignty. And the 35% that wouldn't voice an opinion voted like the 35% that wanted to remain under Israeli sovereignty in every other question. So he extrapolated from that somewhere along the lines of 70% of Jerusalem Arabs want to remain under Israeli sovereignty. Moreover, they valued their Israeli identity card more than they valued their Islamic identity. Can you imagine? More than they valued their Islamic identity, they valued their Israeli ID cards. He found that there was a correlation between relative importance that people gave to freedom, economic prosperity, and a good future for their children, and a desire to remain under Israeli sovereignty, and a direct correlation between the level of importance that people attach to politics and their desire to live under Palestinian sovereignty. If you want a good future for your children, you want to be in Israel. If you want to live in freedom, you want to be part of Israel. Over the past couple of years, 2 years, we have seen a 300% increase in conscription rates, voluntary conscription rates among Israeli Arab Christians. At the insistence of the Christian community, the Knesset just passed a law changing the way that Christians are defined in their identity card from Arab to Christian. They don't want to be identified as Arabs anymore. They want to be identified as Christians. And this is an earthquake. Until the sort of regeneration of jihad as the primary galvanizing force in the Islamic world round about the 1990s, and in a major way with the 9/11 attacks and the advent of Al-Qaeda. I mean, it really started in Afghanistan with the Soviet invasion. The most prevalent political force in the Arab world was Pan-Arabism, right, with Nasser. And that's why in Israel we always refer to them as Arabs and not as Muslims, because that's how they self-identified, as Arabs, not as Muslims. Now, who were the people who were most responsible for the development of Pan-Arabism as a fascistic ideology and worldview, Arab Christians, at the American University in Beirut in the late 19th century. Why? Because the development of a pan-Arab identity enabled Christians of the Arab world to get out from under the subservient, the second-class status of dhimmis, which under Islamic law are required to pay a poll tax and are discriminated against in a whole host of ways by the Muslims under Islamic law. So the whole concept of pan-Arabism was actually a concept that was developed by Christians in order to end the massive discrimination that they suffered under the Ottomans and Islamic law. So what's so extraordinary now is that when you see the rise of jihadist forces throughout the Arab world, the Christians see that they no longer have a place. And if you look at the persecution of the Christians in Iraq, in Gaza, in Syria, in Egypt, and so on and so forth, in Nigeria, in Kenya, and every place where you have rising forces of jihad, you see a whole-scale abandonment of Pan-Arabism, because it's been abandoned by the Muslims and the Christians are left exposed and they're being butchered. So the Israeli Christians are looking at this. They're looking at specifically what's happening in Syria and in Egypt, and also in Iraq, but I mean right next door. And they're saying, oh, we're not going anywhere, we love Israel. The same Christians who were the heads of some of the worst irredentist political parties, their family members are now enlisting in the IDF. And yes, you know, the political structure of the Arab community in Israel is still deeply hostile to Israel, but you're even having Muslims enlisting in the IDF in increasing numbers. In Jerusalem, you have more and more families by the droves, and in Haifa, and in the Galilee, registering their children at Hebrew language schools. This is, again, these are phenomena that are unprecedented because, you know, under the Palestinian Authority, the Israeli Arab community underwent a massive indoctrination towards irredentism, rejection of Israel. And it really started already in the 1970s. And the backlash to the Arab Spring among, first and foremost, Israeli Christians, but increasingly among Israeli Muslims, is profound, and it is important, and it is strategically significant. And I would say, to its credit, the Israeli government, although belatedly, has now recognized how significant it is and is encouraging these people and providing them with protection. So when we look forward at what Israel would look like if we absorb 1.5 million Palestinian Arabs from Judea and Samaria into our population rolls, whether as permanent residents or as citizens, we have to understand that the one thing that we can be certain of, the only thing that we can be certain of, is that we have no real idea what's going to happen, because everything is changing. But we also have to recognize that if we have a strategic goal in mind towards integration of the Israeli Arabs into Israeli society, we can also achieve it in a way that we didn't have really the prospect of doing just 10 years ago. So there are a lot of problems inherent to the plan that I put forward in my book of applying Israeli law to Judea and Samaria, and I address them one by one in my book. I do it as best as I can in what I consider to be just an initial discussion of a strategic paradigm that I think that we should all be adopting. But only the beginning of a discussion. But we have to recognize that in the face of these dangers, there are also profound opportunities. And finally, we have to understand that we really don't have any choice but to do something else. Because it's not true that the status quo is the best we can do. The status quo is a disaster, as we see on college campuses. as we see in the chronic diminution and destruction of Israel's diplomatic position in every single international arena, and the extraordinary inroads that are being made in the campaign to delegitimize Israel with the goal of destroying it. And again, guys, we have the Secretary of State of the United States of America saying there's no reason for anybody to recognize Israel's right to exist as a Jewish state as a condition for peace. And these things are just unthinkable, and it is a disaster. It is a disaster that is unfolding in front of our face. We have to do something else. We have to have a discussion about it. So with that, I'm happy to end my lecture and start a discussion with you about the idea of it. How do we want to do this? People just stand up? I'm going to have to shout because I don't see any microphones in the middle of the room. And I've been shouting and I have a microphone.
What should we do with the terrorists that are released constantly all these years? What is the answer? What is the answer?
Well, you know what the answer is. To stop. To stop. Why are we even considering releasing them? Because we're stuck in this crazy sucker's game of a two-state paradigm where we're not allowed to leave this circle of destruction that we entered into 20 years ago that has gotten us no place good. Yes, sir?
Do you think the American Jews should all march on the White House and demand free Jonathan Pollock?
Yes.
Yes, I do. I absolutely do. Do I think that they're going to do that? Maybe. A couple. Yes, ma'am.
What can we as Canadians do about the proliferation of BDS on campuses? What would you suggest?
I think that what you have to do is sue the administrations of the universities. I think that you have to organize lawsuits by every single Jew who is not being given protection on university campuses. And they have to sue the pants of the universities that are enabling this and that are not protecting them. I also think that, and again, I'm sorry that I'm far less familiar than I ought to be with the Canadian governmental agencies, but whatever your organization is that recognizes nonprofit status, you have to move to revoke the nonprofit status of organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine and other anti-Semitic hate groups that are operating openly on university campuses and elsewhere in Canada.
Talking about the
Louder.
trouble in universities and the demonization and the persecution practically of Jewish students and anti-Semitism. Wouldn't it be absolutely very relevant to institute a new curriculum, or not a new curriculum, but to adopt the rights of the land of Israel, teach students at graduation, high school graduation level, in order to prepare them to combat the accusation?
It's absolutely imperative that people be given the facts. People have got to know the truth about the nature of the Arab-Islamic conflict with the Jewish state and the Jewish people. And we have got to give the truth to our children. We have to try as best as we can to ensure that the truth is also being taught in universities. But you know what they say, charity begins at home, education begins at home. It begins in the homes of each and every one of us when we're talking to our kids, and it also requires us to work very closely with Jewish day schools that we're affiliated with synagogues that we're affiliated with, to ensure that the educational curriculum that Jewish students first and foremost are being taught is true and is telling the story of the Jews. Now I think, and I may be speaking from ignorance, but I'm under the impression that the situation in Canada, as problematic as you may think it is eons better than it is in the United States of America. But, you know, you got to start with something, and I think that you have to make sure that the the curriculum about Israel in Jewish schools is correct, and then spread out to the public school system as well. Yes, ma'am.
The powers that be, to a very great extent, in terms of sort of midstream leadership, both in the States and in Canada, don't exactly share your or our position, and it's very difficult to go up against their position and their monopoly, really, in terms of getting their point out. So what is it that you suggest so that people do get the information and do learn? And when I look around, how do we get younger people to hear this?
You know, Israel is the most inspiring story in Jewish history. We have it better today as Jews because of Israel than we ever had, ever. This is a time for Jews to be proud and to be rejoicing and to be inspired by Israel. The story is so vast and it's so extraordinary. It has no precedent in human history, what we've done in Israel. No precedent. This is something that a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, a 16-year-old, an 18-year-old should be inspired and excited about. Not apologetic about and not defensive about. And we have it in us, and we have to focus. Again, part of asserting our rights and asserting our justice is that it also enables us to show how wonderful it is and to celebrate. You know, one of the things that's been missing for the past 20 years has been a celebration. A celebration, not of Israel's high-tech, but of, it's a miracle! And we did it! We're doing it! It's so exciting and wonderful, and we should, Israel today is the most exciting place to live. It is so much fun and so heartwarming and so inspiring to be living in Israel today, and that should be the message that you're giving to your community, that you're spreading to your kids, that you're spreading to your grandkids, and they should want to be part of it. That's the biggest, that's the most extraordinary thing about where we are today, is that people are missing the point. Look at what we're seeing right before our eyes. We don't see it because we've just been blinded by our fears and our defensiveness and our inability to think past the next news cycle. I just can't tell you how exciting it is to be Jewish today, because we're too busy thinking about how under threat we are. And we're under threat because we're allowing ourselves to be under threat. We're on the defensive because we're not on the offense. We're on the defensive because we're not recognizing the greatness of the Jewish people and the extraordinary miracle that is Israel today. Again, you know, how do we get people excited about Israel? By talking about Israel. By talking about the justice of Israel, by talking about the miracle of Israel, by talking about the excitement of Israel. That's how you get people to do. But it has to be based upon, first and foremost, no apology, no defensiveness, but assault, forward march, Kadima. Look at what we've done. It's extraordinary. Let's celebrate it. Oh yeah, now we have to go sell books.
If you allow. As Caroline just mentioned, we will have books in the social hall behind us, and anybody who would like to buy one of Caroline's books, Caroline would be glad to sign it for you. But I'd like to return for a moment to something that Caroline said a moment ago. She talked about profound opportunity. I was thinking that there's not much I can say that would enhance what Caroline has told us about Israel. But I look around the room here, and I look at all the people here, and I see people from all different parts of the Toronto Jewish community. It's not just one demographic here. It's not just people from Shar Shamayim. It's not just people from the far right, the middle, whatever parts of the community. We have a lot of different people here from a lot of parts of the community. Our profound opportunity here is to take Caroline's message to our communities. Because Toronto, because Jews in the diaspora have an opportunity to take this beautiful thing that is growing, Israel, and support it.
And to be part of it.
And to be part of it. Somebody here is making all the yeses.
Excuse me, I need to ask
So-
a question.
So,
All the questions were from that side, not from this.
I would like to thank Caroline for coming to speak to us.
I need to ask a question.
Please.
What's the question?
You just stated it.
I will
The
let
levy report said that we can build legally in all over Judea and Samaria, not just the settlement expansion, and we are not doing that. Secondly, the levy report says that we are legally to do this. Why aren't we challenging the international community, which says that it's not legal, when it is really legal? We are not doing Hasbara enough.
I agree, that's what I'm trying to do now in my book. That's the whole point, is that, you know, I am spending 5 months of my life now outside, away from home. I picked up my kids and a dog and moved in with Mom in Chicago because I think that it is important to get this message out to as many people as possible. There is a discussion, the most active discussion in Israel today is how and to what degree and when to apply Israeli sovereignty to Judea and Samaria. In return to this session, 2 bills have been put forward by the coalition calling for, on the one hand, applying Israeli law to the settlement blocks, and on the other, applying Israeli law to the Jordan Valley. Okay? That was starting in Toronto. Well, God bless Toronto. Again, the point is that this conversation is happening in Israel. It is not happening outside of Israel. And I wrote this book in order to start this discussion outside of Israel. Because as long as we're not having this discussion, we are stuck knowing the truth and being unable to do anything about it. That is why it is so imperative that we abandon the two-state formula. That is why it is so important that we start asserting our rights to the land. But we cannot do it when we're not talking about it, when we're not spreading the message that there is an alternative to failure. And that is why we have to be talking about it, and that's what we have to have this conversation as quickly as possible and as wisely as possible. Because the faster we get the message out, the faster we can build a Jewish neighborhood in Jenin. Okay? That's it.